Chapter 15 The Wedding Ring of Jadwiga. Jagiello and his suite took over the wagon-roofed chamber and smaller rooms across the court from Jadwiga's apartments. A corridor frescoed with grapevines connected this part of the castle with the large reception rooms, and in addition, there was a secret stairway. The newcomer had, however, little time to think of his quarters or of the business of getting settled in them, for the drama of the Polish-Lithuanian Union was moving fast. A continuous procession of officials came and went as they prepared him for its successive scenes. There was alike coming and going in Queen Jadwiga's rooms. During the baptismal ceremony, she must have felt, as never before, that tremendous forces were charting her life. Forces beyond her understanding or control were carrying her to the next step which it had seemed impossible she could ever take. She responded as much as she could to the enthusiasm of Elizabeth and Constance and the others over the white royal bridal robe and veil and mantle, and indulged them while they lingered over details of her preparation. How in their deep hearts they pitied, adored her. But they, too, were swept along by a realization of the overwhelming significance of all that was passing. Besides, the natural excitement kindled by a wedding could not be quenched. Sensation upon sensation. On Sunday, February 18th, the Church, having declared itself free of all responsibility to William, Jagiello was to pay Austria the 200,000 florins promised William's father by King Louis as Jadwiga's dot. The now Christian ruler of the last pagan country in Europe, and the most beautiful woman in the earth's circle, were to stand together before the altar in Wawel Cathedral. Courtyard and roofs were a bridal white, and naked trees spread a glittering tracery against the sky. Krakow jingled with the bells of incoming sleds. The excited, fur-clad throngs were bright-eyed and rosy-cheeked. Knights were as numerous as poppy seed. Monks were everywhere. Choristers with guitars threaded their way through the packed streets. No marriage so important as this had ever been celebrated on Wawel Hill. It seemed that the kings lying in the crypt, those who had lived and died to build the greater Poland, must be conscious of what was transpiring above their silent tombs. All who could possibly gain admittance were inside Wawel walls, and the multitude below them timed, step by step, the progress of the imagined ceremony. The best of the knighthood of Poland and of Lithuania was gathered in the bannered nave. Archbishops of Poland, representatives of Rome, officiated at the altar. Jadwiga's heart might be broken, but as she walked down the familiar aisle, the folds of her veil and white robe and crimson mantle spreading behind her, her head was high. The daughter of Pius and Angevins was playing her role. As she knelt with Jagiello before the crucifix, the people, dimly understanding, looked on her with awe and reverence. Fate had assigned Jagiello a spectacular role, but through the 50 years crowded with action which remained to him, he clung to the ring she gave him on this day. Henceforth, in song and story too, it became a symbol. The union of Poland and Lithuania was called the Wedding Ring of Jadwiga. The company left the cathedral to recross the snow-covered courtyard and gather in the reception rooms until music called them to the feast. On this commemorative occasion, royal husband and wife entertained together. With Jadwiga's ring on his finger, Jagiello presided with her over the banquet. Tables for over 1,000 guests were covered with several white cloths, one of which was removed each time the gilded plates were, and were ornamented with enameled cups and silver and crystal bowls, flower-filled. Little gilded trees, too, blossomed along the middle, concealing in their foliage charms against poison, sealed earth, and eagle stone, a snake's tongue. These would protect from the evil that might lie at the bottom of the beaker. Hundreds of courtiers served, passed basins and pitchers and towels. Trumpets announced courses of meats and fish, ravioli, fruits and golden cakes, fine wines and hydromel. Farkers appeared in the intervals. Knights boxed and did athletic turns. Jongleurs even entered the hall on horseback. If the tumult grew too great, Jadwiga clapped his hands. The feasting and celebrating continued several days. There were races and tourneys in the jousting place, dances by knights on horseback, every form of amusement dear to the people. And during all this time, Polish and Lithuanian princes fraternized. Those who had helped to arrange the marriage were rewarded with gifts of gold and silver and horses, and of lands as well, of all of which the Mazovian dukes got the lion's share. Of Jadwiga's generosity, the poet Sukenvirt sang, "With gold and silver, gorgeous clothes, and horses with many a roach, rewarded were the noble knights, who him to Krakow brought." As after the baptism at Krakow, many Lithuanian nobles imitated their Grand Duke's example, so now a whole series of intermarriages followed his own. The most important were those uniting the remaining Piasts with the Lithuanian ruling line. Prince Vytautas' sister, Anna, was given to John, of the feudal dukedom of Mazovia, where up to now the name of Lithuania had spelled terror. And Jadwiga's sister, Alexandra, a great favorite with him, became the wife of John's brother, no other than the Duke Zamovit, who had once planned to kidnap Jadwiga. March 4th was the coronation day. A new, richly jeweled crown had been made for Jadwiga. Polish nobles, among them Knight Zawisza, who 2 weeks before had gone to meet him, prepared him for this further ceremony. With a ritual whose splendor again taxes the imagination, the barbarian was received into Poland. These succeeding scenes were 3 parts of one whole, typifying with cumulative power the significance of the union. How the artists would have painted the triptych. Its central panel representing the coronation, and those at either side the baptism and the marriage, each scene challenging the other with its beauty and meaning. Because of these events, one of those invisible frontier lines so strangely potent in human history was suppressed. The boundary of Western Europe was pushed far eastward. Polish influence would follow it. Polish desire for expansion, for agrarian development, would be made possible. Also, a barrier was rising to shut off danger from the West. Even today, after 500 years, this barrier raised against the first wave of the German Drang nach Osten, against the Teutonic Knights, precursors of the Grenadiers, of Frederick and the gray-clad soldiers of Hindenburg, still stands. Abolished temporarily by the partitions, it was restored by the insistence of an American president in the Treaty of Versailles. Peace and the equilibrium of the world were hidden under the folds of Jadwiga's purple mantle. The dynasty of the Piasts was ended, that of the great Jagiellonians begun, and with it that heroic age of Poland which was to last 200 years. After the coronation, King Jadwiga went down into the town as Jadwiga had done over a year and a half earlier, and before the city hall in the marketplace, received the homage of the burghers. After which, he delighted them with a series of banquets and tournaments, covering several days, quickly proving to them, too, that his would be no ungenerous rule. About the time Archbishop Bodzanta was crowning Jadwiga, William rode through the gate of Vienna, and even if the dramatic scenes which symbolized the potentialities of her sacrifice were of great solace to Jadwiga, her eyes must have looked beyond them to the lonely, embittered knight re-entering the city where they had been together, and looked too with piteous questioning on Buda. These tremendous events were bearing her forward, and neither mother nor sister was near. They seemed still more distant because of sinister news from Hungary, where treason threatened to engulf all that remained of her family. In the preceding year, through a plot fomented by the Horvathy family, the Hungarian throne had been offered to King Charles III of Naples. That Charles who had succeeded the murdered Queen Joanna, and whom King Louis had so carefully pledged to loyalty to his wife and daughters. Elizabeth, hoping to forestall a catastrophe, had herself sent a message to Charles inviting him to visit Hungary. And though his wife Margareta urged him not to set out, he embarked. Elizabeth so desperately needed help that she at last carried out the marriage of Mary and Sigismund. Now, as Charles approached, Sigismund retreated to Bohemia, so that only the two queens went in the gilt coach with their escort to meet him beyond Buda. They invited him to live in the castle, but this Charles declined to do, choosing for the time being a city house as domicile. It was not long before cries of, "Out with women! Heaven sent Charles to be our king!" rang down the streets. And not much longer before Charles was strong enough to force the two women to go to Székelyfehérvár to witness his coronation. Only 3 years earlier, Queen Mary had been crowned in this cathedral with her father's crown. Mother and daughter, simply clad, appeared shortly before the celebration, and entering the chapel where King Louis was buried and where former scenes were so vividly revived, they sank with tears and sobs on his tomb. The nobles, watching them, could not but be moved. Had Elizabeth and Mary then cried out to them for protection, Charles might have been murdered, not crowned, before the altar. But they did not cry out. They took their places and sat with their veils gathered closely about them while Archbishop Dmitri proceeded with the ceremony. Later, as the coronation procession began its march along the turbulent streets of the capital, an electric storm swept violently over the city. It split the banner of St. Stephen and shook the palace on the hill to its foundations. Elizabeth, bereft of power, listened to dangerous counsel, sought help in cunning and crime. While she was reading to Charles some of Sigismund's letters, at a sign from Nicholas Gara, one present drew a hidden sword and split the king's head almost to his eyes. Elizabeth fainted. In the deep night, Charles was hurried to Visegrad, where before the end of the month, at Gara's instigation, and probably with Elizabeth's consent, he was strangled by Forgach, the royal cupbearer, and later buried by St. Andreas Abbey. He had reigned 36 days. The day after he had been taken from Buda, the city echoed with the cry, "The King of Naples is killed. The rightful Queen Mary is again on the throne." And the optimistic in the Queen's party, blind to the approaching nemesis, felt that they had extirpated the treason. Such was the home news that reached Jadwiga. While alone, she made her crucial decisions. The report of Charles's burial came shortly after her marriage. Her mind was filled with tormenting concern for her mother and Mary as she faced her new life. It was indeed with relief that she turned to the difficulties she and Jadwiga and the Council of the Crown faced in her own kingdom. King Jadwiga had, from the start, favorably impressed his new subjects. On his very coronation day, he had confirmed the ancient privileges of the nobility and accorded new rights, impressing all by his liberality. He would have liked directly afterwards to go to Lithuania to fulfill his major promise to convert his people to Christianity. But travel routes across the northern marshes and forests would be impassable until spring floods had subsided. Therefore, he and Jadwiga decided first to make the tour of their realm. It was important to consolidate support behind the new joint rule as quickly as possible. And so, almost before the embers of celebrating bonfires were gray, they were deep in preparations for the grand journey. With all this activity, there seemed to be little time for them to get acquainted with each other. Yet they were doing so. To Jadwiga, Queen Jadwiga was the symbol of the new world on whose thresholds he stood. It was not strange that he should feel that there was something almost miraculous in his possession of this beautiful being, at once girl and woman, who with each day was becoming less the girl and more the woman. He caught flashes of a joyous youth beneath her seriousness. Did he, on some morning when he brought his newly arrived dogs to show her, think for a moment that she had forgotten throne and king and would run romping out the door and down the hill? But usually she was the dignified queen. What made her seem older, too, to her husband, was the fact that she had long possessed what he was but beginning to acquire. She had the learning, the accomplishments of a civilization which he coveted for himself and for his people. She understood the mysteries of that religion through which he was to enter a new spiritual world. The priests, to be sure, were his teachers, but his true teacher was his girl wife, already known across Europe for her piety. Through her alone, the golden key to the future had been placed in his hands. His ways were more brusque than her father's, nor had he any of the elegance or charm of William, but his heart was kind. This Jadwiga early discovered. He was unassuming, another ruler over such vast territories as Lithuania's, holding them by courage and skill, might have flaunted his pride. But in Jogailo there was no arrogance. He was ever looking not at the past, but toward the future. It was, in fact, his spirit of self-depreciation that gave him that certain wistfulness, which may early have caught Jadwiga's sympathy. To some, this man of rough vitality seemed burdened by a consciousness of the superior advantages of those born into the Western environment, to suffer inwardly from a sense of inferiority. He could not easily read or write as others about him could, and because of this and other deficiencies, often imagined criticism or slight when none was intended. He was as quick to acknowledge fine qualities in others as he was to confess a fault of his own. His modesty at times amounted to humility. He was ready to fall on his knees to ask pardon for a lack of error on his part. These things the young queen had not expected to find in the warring Lithuanian. They called to her generosity. She would not merely outwardly, but truly share with him. And Jogailo himself was generous in his personal relationships, as he had been in dispensing gifts and privileges after the recent celebrations. One thing she had noticed, that whatever longing or questioning saddened him, it disappeared as soon as he was in the saddle. Once on his horse, his eyes kindled. Confidence shone from his face. Warning voices, to be sure, were not lacking. Voices counseling Jadwiga against inviting future disillusionment by placing too much faith in first reactions to a great experience. Even though Jogailo's forehead was broad and high, they said, and his countenance stamped with nobility, the small eyes were too darkly mobile. Behind them, was there an irritable soul? As yet, Jadwiga had no evidence that there was.